Good evening. That was a nice response. A warm welcome to the University of Regina. We are on Treaty 4 land, the traditional land of the Blackfoot, Cree, Saulteaux, and Sioux people, and the homeland of the Métis people. And as land is central to the Indigenous people, indeed, the spirit of treaty is that we act as stewards of the land. The purpose of the University of Regina, of course, is to educate through research and the exchange of knowledge and ideas. Given the different points of view on tonight's topic, I would ask that the discussion be considered and respectful. The discussion is being filmed and later will be posted on the U of R's YouTube page, Best Of. Tonight is our opportunity to learn and ask questions about oil refinery safety and perhaps other things. We are fortunate to have two very well-spoken and knowledgeable guests with us. First of all, Dan Josephson, who has worked at the Co-op Refinery for over 38 years and is now retired. You can applaud if you'd like. He has served on the local union executive and many other capacities as vice president, negotiating chair, progression review panel member, and pension advisory co-chair, and many other things for which I'm sure you remember him. Also want to recognize Dr. Sean Tucker of the University of Regina Faculty of Business College faculty, and who's organizing the event. And also thanks to the University of Regina for providing these facilities to us. My name is Carol Schick. I'm a former professor at this university and am now happily retired. And I'm pleased to have been invited to chair this session. I want to welcome everyone here, and it is a privilege for me to serve as this moderator and discussion on this very important topic. And although oil refinery safety is certainly not my area of expertise, I appreciate that it is that the university is a place where such topics can be discussed openly and in the spirit of inquiry and respect. Here is precisely the place to debate what can sometimes be a difficult subject. After our speakers share their knowledge with us, everyone is welcome to engage with them and with each other. You can either come to the microphone that is set up over here, or there are some cards that you can write your questions on. If you'd rather not speak at the mic, I can receive the cards and then I will read them aloud for the speakers. I will ask for questions from the floor when the speakers have finished, and I invite you to please try to limit your questions to equal to or less than 59 seconds. Or else you will be invited to come up here as a speaker. Also, I will exercise my right as chair to recognize people who have not yet spoken, who are trying to get a word in edgewise. So thanks to everyone again for coming, and thanks to our speakers for your expertise, and I welcome Sean to begin.
Thanks a lot, Carol, and welcome everybody to the U of R. I also want to acknowledge that Steve is filming the event. Thanks, Steve, with all the technical support tonight. So, the purpose of tonight's gathering is to educate and raise awareness about public safety implications of a potential strike or lockout at the Co-op Refinery. I'm an occupational health and safety researcher, and I also teach OH&S at the U of R. I do consulting for companies, and I also have a role with coordinating research at the Workers' Compensation Board. I just want to be clear that I'm here in my role as an academic at the U of R. And I also want to acknowledge that I have limits to my expertise. I am not a process operator. I have never been on site at a refinery, and I really will limit my comments to the big picture and the evidence that I've collected over the last 5 years about the Co-op Refinery. I also want to acknowledge that I don't want to be alarmist in my comments tonight. But I will say that the community is facing, in the event of a lockout, will face increased risk. That's, in my view, based on the evidence. And I don't want to be alarmist, but there are risks to the community if we have replacement workers operating the refinery. So a little briefly background on this town hall. So it's the second one we've had. We had one last November, and it was really to fill in gaps of knowledge in the community about the refinery and public health and safety and occupational health and safety. Other refineries do have community liaison groups. There are forums for sharing information. We haven't had those opportunities in the past, so we had a town hall. Dan participated in it last year, and we had Harry Feltham from Refinery Newfoundland also participated. And I thought with the breakdown in negotiations this November would be good to have another town hall to address questions and concerns from the community. The refinery management was invited a couple weeks ago to participate in this evening's town hall. They responded that they weren't available. I asked them if they had a statement for me, and they declined to give a statement. However, I will read an excerpt from an interview with Global News that was done this afternoon. It was just published online. So it says the Co-op Refinery is encouraging residents who are concerned about safety to reach out. Quote, "Safety is always our priority," said Brad Delory, Director of Communications and Public Affairs with the Co-op Refinery. Quote, "The public is always welcome and encouraged to contact the refinery, and we'll address those concerns as we would any day. And if you do call us, you'll get a live person." Later in the discussion, I would like to comment on the co-ops not participating in the event. I think it's inconsistent with cooperative values, and I hope someday that they will participate in public forums. They are cooperative and they're member-owned. And then before I start, just a reminder that the event is being filmed and will be put on the U of R YouTube page. So I'm going to move quickly through my presentation so we can get to discussion. I think most folks in the room will know that Co-op Refinery is over 80 years old. It was established in 1935. It's the third or fourth largest refinery today. Majority of its workers are represented by Unifor 594. It was unionized in the early 1940s. Today the union is Unifor 594. And for the most part, from what I've been told, labor relations have been fairly stable and mature over the years. There haven't been a lot of disruptions on site, and there's just a mature collective bargaining relationship there. I think what's unique about the relationship between 594 and the co-op is the language, Article 4 in the collective agreement, which highlights the cooperation being so important between the employer and the union. I'll just leave that language there. Some, I'm sure, are familiar with that language. Now, so there's been historically this stable and mature labor relations, but recently we're seeing a change. So we had a bargaining impasse in 2017, and the 11th hour there was a deal, and there's been bargaining going on for several months. Dan will speak to the issues, I think, that have been discussed in the last two rounds, but the parties reached an impasse, and there was a work camp constructed on site again this year in October. I know also it's been reported in the media that Unifor would be in a position to strike. That's not true. There hasn't been a strike vote of Unifor 594 members as of yet. And that currently, with the mediation not being successful, that the parties are in a cooling off period, and that ends Tuesday, November 26th at 3 p.m., after which the refinery will be in a position to give 48 hours lockout notice. So in October, the refinery issued a press release describing the change on site and bringing trailers on site to build a work camp. And they noted in their media release that, quote, first and foremost, the Co-op Refinery Complex is protecting the safety of its employees and the nearby community. Our business continuity plan, including provision of an on-site work camp, will ensure the safe operation of the refinery in the event of a labor dispute. The refinery, I've studied it for several years. The management has made several statements about their commitment to safety, so this was not news to me. I have a different view, though, of what a lockout would look at for public safety. And I'm just going to jump to that conclusion now. I don't think a lockout or a strike is in the best interest of the city of Regina and the residents that live adjacent to the refinery site. I think the evidence is actually quite clear that that scenario will raise the level of risk to an unacceptable level. And the key factors in there are, one, a plant that has had safety issues in the past 8 years. Two, replacement workers and management who are doing the work of 594 workers will be ticketed certified to do the work. They are relatively less experienced than the unionized workers at the refinery. Three, fatigue will be an issue. It's called a lockout, but you also have workers who are basically locked into a work camp on site, and fatigue will be a major issue. And then fourth, the adjacent community. I think this is a scenario that this is a road we don't need to go down as a community. I think it raises an unacceptable level of risk in the community to public safety. So now I'm going to turn and walk through the evidence to support this view. It's a matter of public record that there have been several significant safety issues at the Co-op Refinery since 2011. We've had two explosions, one in 2011 and then one on Christmas Eve in 2013. There have been several fires that have been reported in the media, as well as several leaks as well. There was also a runaway rail car back in 2016. The latest incident that was reported in the media was a fire from June 14th in 2018. So there have been major incidents at the refinery over the last few years. So what do we know about threats to public health and safety specifically? Well, our best information comes from a major hazards risk assessment report, which the Co-op Refinery paid a consulting company, Marsh Consulting, to write, and it's reported out in 2012. And the reason this report was created is that in 2008, the refinery put forward plans to expand, and that expansion is known as Section 5. As part of that, the government asked for a report. This went to the city, and in 2014, Jeff Leo at the CBC requested a copy of this. The refinery was made aware of the request, and told the city that they didn't want it released. And Jeff Leo went to the privacy commissioners and asked for it to be released, and the privacy commissioner agreed with Jeff and said, yeah, it should be released. The refinery appealed the privacy commissioner's decision, and ultimately it went to court. And the outcome of that case was that judge ruled that about 5 pages of the report would be made public and 48 pages would be sealed. The report outlines what would happen in a worst case scenario of an incident at the refinery. So this picture you see here is actually of the actual court sealed documents of the Major Hazard Risk Assessment report. The report concluded that although the effects from fire, explosion, and toxic gas releases can leave the Co-op Refinery Complex site, the probability to do so is low enough for these large events that the risk is acceptable according to accepted guidelines. Report went also on to say that it is important to realize that the probabilities calculated are based on fatally injuring third-party individuals outside the CRC site. It does not calculate the probability of persons outside the site being able to detect a release or become very ill due to a release from the Co-op Refinery Complex, but not to be fatally injured. And I just wanted to put that there because I think it's an important part of the report that often gets overlooked. So over time, both the refinery and the city of Regina have grown. There's pictures of the refinery site in 1935 with just open prairie around it. Of course, over time, uplands and other communities have grown up around the site. It has residential communities at its doorstep, and the most recent addition is the Somerset residential development, which was approved by the city of Regina in December of 2013, actually just days before the Christmas Eve explosion. I think the comments around the Somerset development are relevant to tonight's discussion about public safety. This development was opposed by the Regina Capel Health Region, the Government of Saskatchewan Ministry of the Environment, and also the Co-op Refinery Complex. In a letter sent to the city of Regina in 2011, the former senior vice president of refining at the refinery said, quote, "The Co-op Refinery Complex believes the city should not allow a residential development in this area of Regina and establish a reasonably large setback for residential developments from industrial facilities." One day after the 2013 explosion, the vice president at Federated Co-op Limited, the parent company of the Co-op Refinery, Vic Heward, was interviewed by the Leader Post, and it was noted in the story that Heward confirmed that Federated Co-op Limited was, quote, "disappointed the city chose to go ahead with the plan and still holds concerns about the development." Heward said, quote, "We raised our concerns with the city several years ago, that we thought it was an ill-advised decision that the city came to its own conclusion." I think it's reasonable to assume that the Co-op Refinery is concerned about residential development close to its facility. In 2016, the Co-op Refinery funded an emergency notification system for the city of Regina. They provided 5 years of funding, 2016 to 2021. A quote from the mayor of Regina, Michael Fougere, from the media release for this announcement said that emergencies can happen at any time and it can be a challenge to get important messages to residents. This system will allow us to advise residents quickly so they can make effective and timely decisions for themselves and their loved ones. He went on to say, "I extend my gratitude to the Co-op Refinery Complex for their generous donation and commitment to the safety of our community." Now I invited Regina Fire Service to provide a statement for tonight's event, and was unable to get a statement from them, but I do have one from Jeff Roden in emergency preparedness with the city of Regina. And Jeff wrote to me this afternoon and said, "The city of Regina has a functional emergency operations center which can be activated to support any significant event, whether it be human-caused or naturally occurring. The Emergency Operations Center has a designated list of City of Regina staff who participate in training exercises and courses which follow the curriculum and principles of Incident Command Systems Canada. The city has an emergency response plan that is used to guide operations of the Emergency Operations Center. Jeff also mentioned they have numerous partners, and I believe they've been in touch with the refinery about their business continuity plan. On the topic of public safety, I also want to highlight a public media release from the Director of Communications during the last round of negotiations. So, and I want to highlight this generally and come back to it if there's interest in the Q&A discussions. So when there was kind of a breakdown in negotiations, we were marching towards a potential lockout at the site. The Director of Communications and Public Relations started the position changed in media communications from Director of Communications and Public Relations to Director of Communications and Public Safety. And this is troubling to me because, to my knowledge, this individual has no credentials or experience in public safety. And I just wanted to highlight that as well. So I mentioned earlier, highlighted significant safety events at the Co-op Refinery Complex. There's also events that are reported to the regulator, but not in the media. And so this is the copy of the Saskatchewan Employment Act and Occupational Health and Safety Regulations. Safety at the Co-op Refinery Complex is regulated by the Ministry of Labour Relations and Workplace Safety. And they have experienced, trained occupational health officers who regularly inspect the refinery and also go out to inspect incidents such as dangerous occurrences when there's been a release of H2S gas or something like that. So back in January, I made a Freedom of Information request to the ministry for files for officers' reports related to inspections and investigations of dangerous occurrences at the refinery. I don't want to be alarmist here, but there are things that happen at the refinery that go unreported in the media. There's, here H2S releases or workers being burned by hot diesel, other incidents that occur, and I just think they need to be a matter of public record, and people need to be aware that there's other things that happen on the site there. The province of Saskatchewan has a public registry of spills, and on that registry you find many spills listed for the Co-op Refinery. I don't want to say a lot about this right now because it's outside my area of expertise, but I received some information about H2S releases at the refinery and that exceeded air quality standards. I'm not in a position to judge that information, but I've turned it over to the Ministry of Environment to look into. But there is that concern there, and not just an explosion, but also a release of gases or other things that could affect public health in the area. Again, I'm not an expert, I can't comment on that. My greatest concern is the role of fatigue among replacement workers who would operate the plant in the event of a lockout. Again, there's a work camp there, and my understanding from the communications from the refinery in the last round of negotiations, the expectation would be most workers would stay on site. I've heard stories from folks there who had cots set up in their office. In addition, there's the work camp there. So effectively, there's a workforce there that's sort of locked into the site. Fatigue will become an issue there. And I don't need to tell everybody in the room how problematic that could be for the safety of the plant. In the last round of bargaining, Vic Heward, VP of Federated Co-op, was interviewed on the John Gormley show. And during that interview, Mr. Heward made the following statement about fatigue, acknowledging how problematic it can be. He said, so we call people in on those days when we don't have maintenance coverage on an overtime process. And that's great for those employees who can get all the extra overtime, I guess. But let's be clear, in the industry, there's something in the industry called, quote, fatigue management, and overtime doesn't allow you to do good fatigue management, and fatigued employees are just that, they're tired. And when people are tired, they tend to make more mistakes. And when you're tired, it's not a good time to be maybe operating heavy equipment or to be maintaining a highly sensitive, place like a refinery. I have serious concerns about the road we're going down in this city. FCL does not need to prove that they can run this refinery. That it's not fair to this community. We don't deserve to bear the risk of that, and it just should not be operated. What's going to happen on site? You've got joint occupational health committees. How is that going to work when you've got essentially all management, mostly management people there? How is that going to work? How is it going to work when a manager wants to go home and they can't, or they've been asked to do something and they're unsure how to do it? Are they going to refuse work? Can they realistically refuse work on that site? These are some of the questions that I have. So I think, again, that given these factors, that this is an unacceptable level of risk for operating the refinery as replacement workers. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Dan, and thank you for your patience, Dan. I'm sorry I've been long-winded here. So what happens next? Well, I'm sure there'll be discussion about this tonight. I'm hopeful that there's a return to bargaining and that the negotiating committees can reach a tentative agreement and that can be ratified by workers. To me, that's the best outcome in this situation for all parties considered and the residents of Regina. Another outcome here is a lockout. And I've already mentioned that's 48 hours notice after the cooling off period. Yet another option could be a strike vote from Unifor 594 members and 40 hours notice and a strike. In the Saskatchewan Employment Act, the Minister of Labour Relations and Workplace Safety has the power to appoint a special mediator or conciliation board. And so our Minister, Don Morgan, may choose to do that. The refinery could also offer or request a final offer vote of 594 members. And then there's other options as well, perhaps binding arbitration on the parties. So I will end it there, and thank you for your patience. I'm sorry that was a bit longer than I wanted to go, but I hope that information is helpful. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Carol, again for moderating this discussion. As was mentioned earlier, my name is Dan Josephson. I was a process operator at the Co-op Refinery for 38 years. I will start out by saying that I do not speak for the refinery. I am in no way authorized to speak on their behalf. I am a representative of the unionized workers at the Co-op Refinery only. My employment was also subject to a confidentiality agreement that is still binding even though I have retired. So there may be questions from the audience tonight that I will be unable to answer because of that confidentiality agreement. As was mentioned, I worked for 38 years at the refinery, all of them as a process operator in the process department. I retired this July. One of the big questions that comes up when you tell someone you're a process operator is, well, what is that? What does a process operator do? My responsibility was for operating processing units within the area of the refinery that was under my control. I retired from the position of master operator. That is the senior operator on a shift. My particular shift was 8 operators, including myself. I was responsible for overseeing the other 7 operators who controlled and operated 7 processing units within my process section. This included 2 operators who controlled the computer operations of those units, and 5 operators who conducted the physical outside operations of those units. Within the refinery, there are 6 sections or areas of processing units, as well as 2 auxiliary areas, each with its own group of operators that are responsible for that area. At any given time, there are at least 50 process operators present on every shift, 24 hours of every day of the year. The refinery refines crude oil. It makes gasoline, diesel, propane, butane. It upgrades and enhances the products that it sells. It removes impurities such as sulfur, nitrogen, metals, and it produces byproducts like liquid sulfur and petroleum coke. There is extensive training that goes into becoming a process operator, not just at this refinery, but at every single refinery out there. I'll just touch on some of that training to give you an idea of what it is involved. Process operators are third-class steam engineers. That includes both boiler and refrigeration plant operations. We have training in fall protection. We have training in confined space entry and watch. We have training in hazardous atmospheres and the gas testing of those atmospheres. We have training in respiratory protection and SCBA use, that's self-contained breathing apparatus that firefighters wear when they're entering a fire. We have training in Workplace Hazardous Materials Information Systems, or WHMIS. We have basic electrical theory. We have basic instrumentation theory. We have distillation theory. We have pump and compressor theory and operation training. Many of us are first aid and CPR qualified. We have a significant amount of advanced industrial firefighter training. Many also have incident and on-scene commander training to deal with any incident that comes up and to direct all responding individuals and firefighting. We have training in OH&S rules and regulations. We have training in environmental hazards. We have training on the transportation of dangerous goods. We have familiarity with organic chemistry, with inorganic chemistry, with physical chemistry, and with thermodynamics. We have familiarity with welding and metallurgy. We have extensive training in unit-specific theory and the operations of those units that we are trained on. We also have several years of practical experience on those units. So the typical time frame to become fully trained, qualified, and reasonably experienced in any given section on all of the jobs in that processing section is between 7 to 15 years, depending on the number of units in that section. That's all I have prepared for you. I certainly look forward to hearing and answering any questions that you may have. Last round of bargaining. Yes. So the last round of bargaining began in January of 2016, continued throughout that year. It reached an impasse in early of 2017. We went through a mediation process. The union did take a strike vote, but did not issue a 48-hour strike notice. In March, the last-minute effort, we were able to come to an agreement after the company had issued a 48-hour lockout notice. That was a difficult agreement for the bargaining committee to accept, but we did and recommended it. It included a significant concession on the pension plan. One that the union, while we did not want, we accepted to protect the longevity of the plan and to protect the longevity of the plant. At that time, Mr. Gormley had Mr. Heward on his radio show. And Mr. Heward stated publicly on that show that every member of the defined benefit plan at the Co-op Refinery would retire on that defined benefit plan. That was his personal assurance, his promise. I believe his words were, "Let me be perfectly clear." Well, it didn't take very long after that ratification before the company changed their mind. During the life of this last agreement, the company informed the management people who were in that defined benefit plan that they were being removed from it. They also removed other benefits that the managers enjoyed, benefits that the unionized members also have enjoyed and have bargained for, and that the company had freely agreed to provide. This round of negotiations, the company has decided that they need to take those things away.
Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Dan. Now I'll open the floor to questions or comments. Once again, if you come over to the mic, you can raise your question. If you have a question that you don't want to speak about, you can write it down on some of the cards that are available. I can come and pick them up, and then I can speak them for you if you'd like that. But otherwise, please make your way to the mic. And perhaps indicate who you would like to have answer.
Just while the lineup is forming for the microphone, I just want to speak a little bit about the major hazard risk assessment report that was done. While that's never been released to the employees of the refinery, we have a fairly good idea of what's in it. I want to talk about that report and how they came about their conclusions. Now, they would have done this assessment based on the idea that the plant was being run by the normal amount of people that it's usually run by. In the event of a lockout, I'll back up. Those number of people is approximately 730 or so unionized people in the plant. Total number of employees is a little over 1,000. So, in the event of a lockout, you've just removed 3/4 of the employees of that plant. They intend to continue running the plant. They have done this by conscripting, and I use that word specifically, conscripting management people and telling them they will be staying in the plant. They're not free to leave. They will be locked in, just as the unionized employees will be locked out. As I mentioned, at any given shift, there's about 50 process operators on shift. That's the minimum that the company has said is necessary in order to both operate the unit safely and to respond to an emergency. There aren't that many people trained and qualified within the plant, within the out-of-scope people, to be able to do that job. There aren't. There is maybe a couple dozen individuals, former process operators with experience, that would be able to oversee some of the areas. There isn't the experience in the board operations that is necessary to continue to operate that plant safely. As any process operator will tell you, once you have progressed past those boards and not worked them for a while, you lose your proficiency in doing that job. Not that you're incapable, but you lose the proficiency. That proficiency is paramount in the event of an emergency. You must know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. That proficiency is not there. In order to safely run this plant, it takes approximately 280 process operators in the process department. If there's a couple dozen that are locked in and trained, that's not enough. They have conscripted other management staff and given them training. The company has claimed that these individuals are trained and qualified. Well, as I mentioned, it takes 7 to 15 years to qualify on all the units in a section. It takes approximately a year to qualify on one and be experienced enough to handle incidents on your own, to handle the operations. There is not the experience. Replacement workers cannot do this job. So why is the company doing this? Why are they going to continue to run? Because they want to. They don't need to operate the refinery. If they choose to lock out the workers, it's not necessary that the plant continue to run. The operators, the workers in that plant, if they were locked out, would leave it in the state that the company requested. If the company wanted it to be shut down safely, that's what those workers would do. Because at the end of the day, they want to have a plant to come back to. Yes, go ahead.
I'm a retired firefighter with the City of Regina. I spent 35 years being a firefighter. I listened to your comments about the safety of the trained firefighters on the grounds. Now, with a lockout or a strike, there will be no trained firefighting staff there, from what I understand. And the City of Regina does not provide firefighting operations at the upgrader. What our job was just to support the firefighters on the plant or on the grounds were the ones that did the work, and we were just supporting them. So if there's a lockout or a strike, are there going to be any trained industrial firefighters on that site?
That's a good question, thank you. There would be a few. There are a few members of the management staff who are part of the emergency response crews who train with the firefighters. But the vast majority of the firefighters and first responders to an incident are the unionized workers. So there would be a few.
Basically, you wouldn't have an effective firefighting crew out there.
You absolutely would not.
All right. Another question that's kind of running through my mind is this camp that they're building on at the upgrader. I know the City of Regina, anytime you build anything, you have to get permits. Also, it's zoned industrial. Has that zoning been changed that anybody knows to allow residential on that site?
I have no knowledge of whether that permits have been attained, nor do I know if any zoning has been changed.
Yeah, this is actually a follow-up on that question regarding the Somerset development and the on-site camp. I was looking at a slide that Sean had, which was the Somerset residential development, which was approved by the city, and Vic Heward and others at the refinery objected to the city actually approving that location. And then there's that slide where you show the circle around the plant and then the circle around that development. My question is, I guess, if that's a concern, if the residential development is a concern to the refinery because of its proximity to the refinery, would they not have the same kind of concern for a camp, presumably on site? So if it's too dangerous to have a residential development within, that far away from the site, seems to me that it would be too dangerous to have a residential development on the site to house the scabs and the management. And then I'd really be interested about the permitting from the city of Regina to go in residential in an industrial site. So if anybody has any ideas on that, I'd like to hear.
Well, on the surface, it certainly appears that they have more concern for the public in general than they would for their conscripted labor that they would walk into the plant. Other than that, I have nothing more to the organization.
No, I don't have anything more to add to that, insight into the city. On the firefighting, I did ask questions about who would respond and that, because I do know there's the fire service on site, but I didn't get any answers. And perhaps it'll be forthcoming if there is a lockout there, if the media asks about that, we might get some more information.
Question here at the mic?
Speaking of hazards, you've asked a professor and an elected official to microphones. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm not sure I'm in a place to respond necessarily to the questions about the permitting process, but in my capacity as city councillor, I did ask this question, and the responses were quite nebulous. So when the city receives an application for a permit, it reviews it in accordance with existing bylaws, whether it's zoning or building code, etc. So they don't make a political determination of whether something should or should not be there. It's simply taken at face value. After asking questions and actually having quite a bit of access to staff over email, I'm still not confident that it's safe. And I'm not saying this as an expert, I'm saying this because some of the questions were lacking the detail I think would be required if we were to make a determination and say that camp and the people housing it are safe. The reason I say that is there was some misunderstanding about the former position that the refinery held around the Somerset development. So the individuals I was corresponding with didn't know about that statement. So I informed them and provided those reports. Sean, you have those quotes up there. The other thing I was told, and I think it's worth digging into further, is that the facilities, the trailers, whatever you want to call them, meet national building code standards. But when I press that question further, what does that mean in light of the specific hazards that they would face, whether it's the release of gases or an explosion? They said, well, it's out of the blast zone, which suggests to me there was a conversation at the top level between someone in the city and the refinery over what was going on here. But otherwise, I didn't get any clarification on what does that mean. Are there specific trailers and facilities that are meant for these kind of hazardous locations? I'm saying this because I'm not getting the adequate information, and eventually when I pressed further, I was told just FOI. As a city councillor, I was told to just go through the Freedom of Information request to get what I thought should be very basic statements and a position on the safety of one site, and second, the facility in which these replacement workers will be housed. So I have a series of questions, and if I have a series of questions, I think the public should have a series of questions pertaining specific to that site, which they claim to be accessory use. So in other words, it's not zone residential, but it's accessory to the principal purpose of the land in that facility. So going back to what Sean and others have pointed out here, this deserves more exploration. There's a lot of uncertainty around the specific application, the specific nature of where those workers are going to be housed. So even right next door with the replacement worker camp, that's a serious question, never mind all of the residences around that and the public itself. I think they deserve answers to these questions. I'm not receiving them, and I think Dan, your point about how well trained the process operators and others are, that's the first line of defense, and if fire is actually called, that means it's too late. So even if fire protective services have checked off on this, as soon as those trucks are deployed, it's too late, I would argue. So I think that's something to recognize, whether or not the leadership in the fire and protective services signed off. It means there's a failure of all those other safety mechanisms. Again, going back to the public safety question.
Thanks for that background. We just don't have a lot of information either from the city and especially from the refinery. There may be, grounds here in the Saskatchewan Employment Act in section 3-8 with general employer duties. Part A, it's very clear. It says every employer shall ensure, as far as it's reasonably practicable, the health, safety, and welfare at work of all the employer's workers. And to me, that work camp is a red flag on that first and very important employer duty.
To answer the question about are there trailers that exist that are blast proof? Well, yes, there are. At various times during the year, trailers are situated within the refinery during turnaround periods where they're refurbishing units, taking them down, cleaning them, making repairs, revamps, etc. Their statement that these trailers in the work camp would be outside of the blast zone that's a fair enough statement. The blast zone isn't that big. It's calculated based on a potential for an explosion, and I believe it uses pressure. So of course, that pressure is going to dissipate with distance. You move them far enough away, you don't have that pressure to deal with in most cases. Being blast-proof doesn't mean they're gas-proof. There's more hazards at the refinery than just an explosion. There are many hazards. It is a dangerous industry. The potential for problems, for disaster, is tremendous, which is why the workers focus so strongly on safety. It's why the company insists that we focus on safety, because it's necessary. It is, without a doubt, the #1 focus of every worker in that refinery. Safety is paramount for every worker. At the end of the day, each of us wants to be able to go home to our families. We want to ensure that the surrounding neighborhoods get to enjoy their livelihoods in their homes with their families. It's something that all of us, all of the workers there, take very, very seriously.
I just want to make a quick follow-up point on that. In looking at the refinery over the last 8 years, I think, from the outside, whenever the attention got off of safety and it was on something else like the expansion, which turned out to cost considerably more than they thought it would. But whenever the attention was elsewhere and it got off safety, bad things happened. I'm simplifying here. What I'm concerned about is that somebody wants to prove a point that they can operate this refinery with replacement workers. And I'm concerned when I hear messages. I just saw one new one this afternoon on Twitter feed of the refinery that we fuel Western Canada, we're going to keep going, we've got to get this thing, and there was a reference to we got to get the most out of the plant, it's just a recipe for trouble, and we just don't need to go there. This plant is too important to this community. There's lots of jobs there. It's questions about the safety of replacement workers there and the managements there. We just don't need to go down this path. It's not worth it at all. And I am concerned about the messaging getting around production away from safety. other questions?
I have a question about their safety, not only confined within the refining complex itself, but what is the impact going to be if there is an explosion or a fire, if it goes into Enbridge or to Husky, because there's pipelines there.
Not quite clear on what the question was. What is the plan, or what is the possibility? Or?
What would be the possibility and what would be their reaction, and was that included in that safety?
I don't know if that would have been included in the safety plan, because those properties aren't part of the refinery. So I couldn't speak to whether it was included in that or not. There is mutual aid agreements between Enbridge and the refinery that are in place should an emergency occur in either location. The reality of the situation is that Enbridge has very few staff on site. So if there was an emergency there, they would be relying on the refinery workers to assist, or the Regina Fire Department. Their ability to aid the refinery in an emergency is extremely limited. It would be based on a small amount of equipment or firefighting materials at best.
So I brought some copies of the major hazard report. They're up front here, and I do believe there is a reference there to pipelines there, and there was an issue that was flagged there. I do have a belief that the refinery followed up on that issue and addressed it, but I would encourage you to have a look at the report.
How much lead time was the co-op given for this event? Like how much advance notice were they given in their invitation to come?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So a couple weeks, and I want to also speak to last year's event as well. So a couple weeks, and I didn't hear anything back, so I followed up with an email and said, hey, can you just let me know by Friday? And I heard on the Friday that they were unavailable, and I addressed that email to the executive assistant to Scott Banda at FCL, and also Gil Adressi at the refinery. And Brad Delory actually replied to me. Last year's event, it would be several months in advance of the event that I reached out to the refinery, and numerous phone calls with FCL. And, you know, how many people are Sherwood Co-op members in the room here? Show of hands, like pretty much the whole room. Like, honest, I am too. I shop there, buy all my gas there, you know, and it's a point of principle for me. But I can tell you, honestly, it's a great disappointment. I mean, you know, Andrew Stevens has done some work on the corporatization of FCL and the Co-op Refinery, and it has a certain brand, right? And it markets itself a certain way, but there is very little transparency and accountability. And this is very problematic. We saw it with the Saskatoon Co-op right there, and I think I think the public needs to know that they are very resistant to talking to this community, and they should talk to this community. And I'm disappointed that, again, there was another opportunity to come out and speak to the community, and they declined to do so. I will continue to invite them to participate in public events, but I don't think they're going to come. But I hope they'll take an opportunity, maybe somebody else will invite them to come out and speak. And I hope they take that opportunity, because we can't go on like this any longer. This is 2019. You don't get to act like this, especially if you're a member-owned co-op.
Just want to follow up a little bit on the concept of the workers being locked out. It removes the vast majority of workforce, and as I've said earlier, this is a dangerous industry. There's absolutely no question about that. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that as soon as they lock out workers, an incident is going to happen. But equipment breaks down, it needs continual maintenance, it needs repairs. And the longer you go without properly maintaining that equipment, the more likely you are to have an incident. Every incident has the potential to expand and become worse. What keeps that from happening is the experienced workers on site who prevent those incidents from ever occurring, if at all possible. And on the rarer occasions when an incident does occur, they deal with them quickly, safely, and effectively. So just locking up the workers doesn't mean you're going to have an incident, you're going to have an explosion, you're going to have a fire, you're going to have a gas release. But the longer that lockout occurs, the greater the likelihood of that happening. To give an example that maybe non-refinery workers could relate to, locking out the workers and having the plant run by untrained, underqualified replacement workers is like a 12-year-old kid taking dad's car for a joyride. He might have seen somebody drive, he might have played a video game and thinks he knows what he's doing. And he might be able to navigate that car for a little while down a straight road. But as soon as the curves start coming and the traffic hits, there's going to be an accident at some point in time. And if that kid is lucky, he won't get hurt. If he's not lucky, he might not walk away from it, or somebody else might not walk away from that accident. And that's the kind of potential we're talking about when you're dealing with locking your experienced staff out of a workplace with this much potential hazards. It's just foolish. It's just foolish.
Thanks so much. I have to say this is the most bizarre thing. Isn't it strange that we're talking about this? I have in my mind, there's like words like this is outrageous, this is cavalier. I don't even understand why we're having this conversation, that the people who run the refinery would think it's okay to keep running, and potentially we're just sitting around watching it happen. And this is really far from my area of expertise. Can the government of Saskatchewan not step in and say, please people, grow up, this is ridiculous? And Dan, it sounds like you're speaking from somebody who has a lot of insight, obviously, and perhaps you've already answered this question in the things that you've said about public safety and safety in general being a concern, but you know, if you were still working there, how would you be feeling? You know, what would you be doing?
That's a good question. Thank you. If I was still working there, I'd be very concerned. This is not a direction that the company needs to go. In the past, the company acknowledged many, many times that there was no way they could run the plant themselves, and they would never try. The first time they came to that conclusion that they were going to do it was 3 years ago in negotiations, that they intended to, in fairness, they intended to run the plant in the event of a work stoppage. We were surprised at that statement. We're concerned at that statement. We're concerned not just for the people who would be outside the plant, We're concerned for the people that are locked in the plant. Many of them are our co-workers. We don't want to see them hurt. We don't want to see them killed. We don't want to see their families affected by something happening to them. This isn't just about the 730 or 750 unionized workers, or the 1,000 people at the refinery, or the 10,000 people in the community. It's about more than that. It's about safety of everyone. And I'd be very concerned if I was still there. I am concerned, because I have a lot of friends that still work there.
Just want to make an addition here, because the question also touched on the government's role here, and I'm not clear on the details here, but I believe the essential services legislation, well, we have an expert on essential services legislation, but I believe that it doesn't apply just to the refinery whatsoever. And in terms of Minister Morgan's approach to the matter, you know, Minister of Labour will sit back and certainly let the process play out, and the pressure is really going to come on both parties in the next few days, and it'll certainly be a gut check time whether they're going to go over the edge and have a lockout or there's going to be a strike vote. I think I respect Minister Morgan, what he will do, how we will use his power in the legislation. I could not predict how that would happen, but I think he genuinely cares about the situation. I think this situation would get his attention. And I think he would understand with what's at stake. But how he would act, when he would act, is unknown, and any Minister of Labour would hold their cards close, so we don't know.
Thank you very much. It's been an interesting presentation. I'm just wondering, what kind of time frame do we have in terms of some of the scenarios you were talking about? If the refinery refines 130,000 barrels per day, is that right? So to keep that in terms of the chain, oil coming in, if you say we're going to stop taking oil, where does that oil come from? Or if we stop producing gas, when do the co-ops run out of gas? I mean, do they also provide other service stations with gas? What kind of time frame are we talking about? Because that might have an impact, especially on the special mediator and what the minister might do.
That kind of time frame, as far as the availability of product for service stations throughout Western Canada would vary. It goes in a cycle throughout the year. Part of it is dependent on you know, how long outside of the turnaround period, how long they've been operating during the year to fill their tanks, whether we're in a spring seeding scenario or a fall harvest scenario where you have significantly more fuel used than say in midwinter or that kind of thing. So their inventory varies basically weekly as to how much product is available, but they're not the only refinery in Western Canada. They fuel Western Canada as their statement, but they're not the only one. So other refineries have capacity that they could increase to compensate for a decrease of capacity or whatnot from the co-op. So there's no easy answer to your question, but they aren't a monopoly on the producer of fuel.
Hi, Ben. I don't know if you'll be staying afterwards for press interviews or press interview, but I'm here with Leader Post. Just wanted to make sure I caught you for two things. First of all, the replacement workers, you argue that they're not sufficiently trained for the kind of work that they're going to be doing. We've heard from the company that they're the same workers that do turnarounds. I don't know exactly what that means, but it implies that they do work at the refinery. Do you know them, and can you speak to what kind of expertise they may have?
Well, if they're replacing the maintenance department with replacement workers, they may have some of the same tickets, but they have little to no knowledge of the plant. They have no knowledge of the safety programs, the safety protocols, the requirements involved in work permitting on how to do a job, where units are located, where fire equipment is located. Basically, when they come in for a turnaround situation, they are handled with kid gloves, I would put it that way.
And just one more question. Have you had any personal experience with any of the safety incidents that Sean was talking about, like the H2S gas releases or the employees that were burned that he mentioned? Is that something that you're aware of and can speak to from personal experience?
I'm aware of a number of them in my capacity both as a process operator and on 2 occasions I was the employee co-chair of the OH&S committee. So I have personal experience investigating incidents and issuing reports and recommendations based on those incidents. While I can't speak to specifics due to confidentiality, I have seen many things that I wish I hadn't.
Is it common?
How do you define common?
How would you define common?
My definition of common may be different than someone in the general public. It's one is too many. One incident is too many. And I've seen far more than one.
Can I make a follow-up comment on training, because it's been mentioned a lot, and I'm sorry for being kind of bookish here on this, but if we go back to our OH&S regulations, section 19, training, it's very clear. Part 4, an employer shall ensure that no worker is permitted to perform work unless the worker, A, has been trained, and they define training up above on some essentials here, and has sufficient experience to perform the work safely and in compliance with the Act and regulations, or B, is under close and competent supervision. The training sections, just make a comment about our legislation. The reason we have this language here is because there have been serious injuries and fatalities in the past where there wasn't compliance with these provisions. And that's why it says, has been trained and has sufficient experience. Now, I can't comment, I don't work at the plant, I can't comment on the workforce that the refinery would use. I can only draw on what Dan has said here. And he said that, they're relatively inexperienced. And to me, that's going to be something that probably the regulator, if we go down this path, and again, I hope we don't go down the path, the regulator is going to probably have a close look at, are they really trained to go out there? It's more than having the tickets and going through different forms of training. There is an expectation of sufficient experience, and if you don't have that, you're under close. That's in physical proximity and competent supervision. That's the trade-off there. So I just wanted to add that to the question. Thank you.
And an additional follow-up to that, when the company says that a number of the workers would be the ones who work turnarounds, those are maintenance workers, those are not process operators. There are no process operators from outside the plant who come in and work turnarounds.
Yeah, it's kind of like, we're going to keep the school open, but there's not going to be any teachers there teaching the students. I'm not sure that this is really a question, more of a comment, I think. I actually live within the close vicinity. I live in North Regina, not far from the refinery, and so sometimes I smell what's coming off of that refinery. And I've been paying a little bit of attention, kind of following this thing. I'm retired now, so I've got not much better to do than to, read the news and watch what's going on. And I'm actually struck by a couple of things. Number one is that this is a cooperative that has strayed so far from its roots that it's astonishing to me. I come from rural Saskatchewan, small town co-op movement, and so when I see managements behaving in this irresponsible and reckless way, it makes me angry. That's one point. The second thing is the amount of money that this company is spending to actually fight what's the real issue here, which is the pension plan. Really, I mean, it's boiling down to the pension plan. That's what I'm hearing. The workers want their defined benefit pension plan, and the employer wants to convert it to a defined contribution plan because they think they can save a few $1 million. Well, this plant makes $3 million a day, and I'm not sure shutting it down for a couple of weeks and losing $3 million a day for a couple of weeks while I try and run it with some scabs from Ontario and a bunch of management people who don't know how to do it is going to save them anything in the long run. So I think that that's reckless and irresponsible. And a company that's got that much or that lack of respect for the people who work there, including the people who they're going to put in danger by having them on site running a plant that they don't know how to run, is reckless and irresponsible. So for me, it just doesn't fit. It makes no sense. It's a hazardous for the people who work there. It's a hazard for the people who live in the community. It's a hazard for our whole community, and it's an attack on the workers who have made this cooperative the profitable organization it is, generating $3 million a day profit. And if the city of Regina is going to stand by and let that happen, or if the government of Saskatchewan is going to stand by and let that happen, because I have no doubt in my mind that the senior management people have already had their conversations with Michael Fougere and the provincial government. That's going on. Let's not pretend it's not. I've been around this province long enough to know that those conversations have happened. And so it needs for us to raise our voices to the co-op management, to the city of Regina to show some responsibility, to actually enforce their own bylaws around whether or not they can have a permanent camp in that location, to the provincial government to, dispatch occupational health and safety to make sure that the place is healthy and safe for the people who are going to work there, and then start asking questions of the co-op board and the CEO and Scott Banda and the management at the refinery about what it is that they're attempting to do here. What are you trying to save? Spend $80 million on a contingency plan to put a second, camp in there? That's the information I'm hearing. $80 million they spent in the last bargaining for a contingency plan that they never used. So how much is this contingency plan going to cost? And they're never going to save that kind of money. So anyway, that's my soapbox. I think we can push back against these people, but we need to write letters and make phone calls and call up Mayor Fougere and Twitter and Facebook and share all this stuff. Anyway, I hope that you're successful in getting a settlement. And I hope that we don't have to go down the path of seeing what happens if in fact this plant is being run by people who aren't qualified to do it, and everybody's at risk.
We brought up the finances, and I think that's a good point to talk about just briefly here. Because we're talking about a company that is pushing the workers to take 17.5% rollbacks. That is freaking huge. That's massive for the workers out there. And it's the same company that made $1 billion profit last year. And they made $1 billion profit the year before. And in the last 3 years, they've made $2.5 billion in profit. Not just income, in profit. This is not a company that needs to take a tiny portion of their expenses and reduce it fractionally. They are rolling in cash. Let's throw a little perspective on $1 billion. That's more than twice the revenue of the city of Regina for a year. There's about 1,000 workers at the refinery. There's over three times, I believe, the number of workers in the city of Regina. And that doesn't take into account any of the other expenses, like roads, water, sewer, fire protection. I mean, you could go on and on with the expenses of the city. So we're talking about a company that makes more than twice what the city of Regina even brings in a year. And their answer to that is we have to get 17.5% rollbacks from our employees. It's shameful. It's shameful.
I just want to add that it really, going back to the question before about, when was the refinery invited to participate in this event, it's a big disappointment that they're not here tonight. I had included in the invitation, I said, let's talk ahead of time, we can sort out, a way that you can participate. I said, we'll read a statement, nothing at all. As a side note, I think FCL is potentially going to go through some difficult period of time ahead. I think they're losing sight of the owners of the co-op, which is everybody in this room and everybody else across Western Canada that's a co-op member. I think they're losing sight of that. People join the co-op and buy product from co-op and services from co-op because they're different. And what we're seeing is that the co-op may not be so much different anymore. And it's hard for me to say that, but that's what I'm seeing, unfortunately. They've lost Calgary Co-op for their grocery side. There are problems at FCL. And I think they need to do some soul searching about what their values are and what they stand for. And I hope the board of directors will watch this town hall and think about some of the questions that have been raised here and some of the questions that were raised in Saskatoon a few months ago there. Because I think they need to think about this as what are they? And what are their values and what is their vision for the future? Because it's looking a lot to me like they're no different from anybody else. And what do you got left then, right?
Thank you, Sean. I'll just touch on that a little bit as well. I am a co-op member. I believe in co-ops. I grew up in a co-op family. My parents are in the audience. We shopped at the co-op grocery store every week. We went to the co-op hardware store. That's where we bought our tools. That's where we bought everything. Everything was co-op. My father worked at the refinery for 25 years before I started. So there is a long history of co-op values within this community. I believe in the co-op, but I believe Federated has lost its way. And I hope that they can find that way back and come back to what they were created to do. And that was to serve the community. Locking out your workers, threatening the existence of the refinery, putting it at risk, putting the entire cooperative retailing system at risk for next to no return just doesn't make sense.
Are there any last questions or comments? I've sort of fallen down on my 59-second limit, but we've had some good comments too. Is there a last speaker? Yeah. And Sean? Shall we give the last word to Sean then?
Oh, good Lord. Never do that. I am genuinely fearful about the next few weeks. I am fearful that somebody at FCL has a point to prove. Nobody needs to prove a point. There's people who live adjacent to that refinery. There's a school there. We don't need to do this exercise. It's unnecessary. I'm not taking a position here, nor will I ever take a position on one side or the other on what's on the table. I am here speaking to public safety, and the plant should not operate with replacement workers. It's, as been said repeatedly tonight, it would just raise a level of risk. You know, one way Dan used the driving analogy, the way I think about it, let's say the plant's 99.99% reliable right now. And each day you've got replacement workers there, either sleeping on a cot in their office or at the work camp. And they're away from their family. Some of them are away from their kids. And some of them are probably scared. Some of them are stressed. Each day that goes on, the reliability of that place drops. 99.6%, 99.2%. 2 weeks in, where are we at? Where are we at after that? That's unacceptable risk. We need to find a better way to resolve this. I hope parties can find a better way and get a deal. And I also hope, and try to end on a positive note here, that for heaven's sakes, where are we here? You've got terrific language in your collective agreement. Get back to this language, get a better relationship in the plant. This is a better way to go. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Thanks for all the questions, and have a safe drive home.
I want to thank our guests for speaking tonight, and I thank you too for your comments, because they're the reason that they are speaking. You're the reason they came here to speak. So thanks for making it all worthwhile. And I think it's unfortunate there's no one from management to represent themselves, because we could have had an even more robust presentation. But thank you very much for your attention tonight.